Many of you will know Jean Borgatti since she has been one of our visiting researchers at BU for some time. She has been an instructor at Clark University in art history and has also worked for a decade as a consulting curator for African and Oceanic art at Fitchburg Art Museum. And so she has, over the years, kept us informed of a number of interesting exhibits there. Jean has also spent a considerable time in Nigeria and Benin, and we have benefited regularly from her reports from her time as Fulbright Scholar. And so I'm not going to take more time since we're late starting. I believe that Eric is going to be monitoring the chat after Jean has finished talking. Eric will field those questions. It's also possible, if you want, to raise your hand and you can ask the question yourself. We do have the possibility of letting you speak. So please keep that in mind. So Eric, you want to say anything before Jean starts?
No, that's just right. So yeah, at the end, I'll be happy to field the questions. You raise your hand or enter them, and I can unmute you, and we'll just go through the list that way. So thank you all for bearing with us.
Great, thanks, Jean. Let's hear what you have to say.
The Benin Kingdom is located in southern Nigeria and has been a political entity since the 10th century, although the present dynasty took shape in the 13th century when the ancestors of the present Oba finally wrested the symbols of authority from the previous kings. The present Oba, Ewari II, the 40th Oba in this dynasty, was enthroned in 2016. According to Paula Ben Amos, the three symbolic items wrested from the previous dynasty were commemorative heads, the throne, and the iron sword called the Ada. These were incorporated into the new dynasty's symbolic structure to lend them greater legitimacy, though they were transformed in terms of materials in the case of the heads and throne, as well as shape in terms of the throne. From the image of Oba Arediawa, whom you see in the lower right-hand corner, the late father of the present Oba, you can see that the throne has further evolved over time. Oba Isigie, the king of interest here in relation to the Ekasa dance, played a central role in Benin's expansion and artistic flowering in the first half of the 16th century. At this time, the kingdom was moving towards the territory that it would control at its height, extending in the west to Lagos, in the northwest to Ekiti and Owo, in the northeast throughout most of the Ishan and Edo North areas, and to the east up to and beyond the Niger River, including Igala and the Onitsha Igbo. Catherine Gunch, art historian and curator of African art at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, has suggested in her recent book, The Benin Plaques, a 16th century imperial monument, that he was the Oba responsible for initiating the program of brass plaques that chronicle court life, history, and protocol, building on the existing tradition of casting that was stimulated at this time by the increased availability of copper and brass through trade with the Portuguese. The example on the screen shows the Oba and two supporters, with medallion heads representing the Portuguese in the background. There because they brought tremendous wealth through trade, and because Portuguese soldiers fought as mercenaries in the Benin army. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the issues surrounding the dispersal of Benin art throughout the world, mostly Europe and North America, in the wake of the punitive expedition to Benin, called in Benin the Benin Massacre. It's all a matter of perspective. In 1897, some 1,000 plaques were taken from the Oba's palace as the spoils of war. Returning to Ekasa, Queen Idea is said to have witnessed the dance in the context of occult activities and thought it would make a fitting celebration to bring to the coronation of her son, Esigie. She was assisted in acquiring the program by the Ezomo, the Benin war chief, and the people of Ogbelaka, Egwadase, and Eben communities or guilds, all of whom have roles to play in contemporary Ekasa performance. It is the war chief's assistance that is commemorated by the single performance at his compound during the Ekasa period of performance, when sacrifice is made at the Iroko tree, a habitat for witches historically. And this is what you see on the screen. She also told her son that it should be performed as part of her own burial ceremonies, providing the precedent for its performance at burial ceremonies for all titled queen mothers since. Now, this rather simple account of origins and players masks a complex of historic relationships at the heart of the Benin Kingdom, the Oba's Palace. Ekasa begins the day after the crown prince, the Ediacan, takes up residence at the original palace site at Usama and continues up to 3 lunar months after the coronation. In 2016, Ekasa was performed between October 12th, with the coronation actually occurring on the 20th, that is the public ceremony, and December 15th, when the Oba took a standard from a young participant and joined the dancers to close the ceremony. Ekasa has 3 venues: Usama Palace, the site where Oramian, the father of Aweka I, built the first palace, and where all succeeding Obas from Aweka I, around 1200 CE, were crowned and lived until about 1250, when another Oba moved the palace to its present site in the center of the town. This is the one known as Arasogbo Palace. The third site is the Ezomo's compound, which you saw in a previous slide. However, most of the dancing takes place at the main palace at Arasogbo. Three guilds perform Ekasa: Ogbelaka, Egwadase, and Eben. Ogbelaka and Egwadase fall under the Iwebo Palace Society, considered keepers of the king's regalia. Ogbelaka men are musicians and singers, and they also perform in other contexts at the Oba's request. Egwadase men are said to be descendants of Queen Idea, accounting for their inclusion as Ekasa performers. Eben is a guild affiliated with the Iwegwe Palace Society, the group that provides the Oba's domestic servants, spies, and security. Eben has particular responsibilities in relation to the Oba's burial and the performance of Ekasa for the formal funeral of a queen mother. The history of each quarter or guild is complex and well beyond the scope of this presentation, but it raises some interesting questions. I had hoped to explore them in a longer paper, augmented with more research in Benin, but I'm going to have to leave that now to my colleague and sometimes co-author, Dr. Josephine Eweka Abbey. The primary objective of Ekasa is to honor and protect the new Oba in his transition to a living god as king, and the Ioba in her transition from the natural world to the supernatural world during her funeral ceremonies. Songs of praise and warning, dance, and art objects come together in ritual display to achieve this purpose. The distinction and relationship between the three groups is evident in the performance structure in the styles of the standards, called upeku in Edo language, and costume. All wear white wrappers. However, Ogbelaka and Eben performers wear coral beads, while Egwadases wear a twisted white rope slung over the shoulder and chest. Ogbelaka and Egwadase perform together, dancing in the same circle on the same days. Eben performers dance separately, and on the few occasions they appear on the same day as the others, at the actual coronation, the performance at the Izomos compound, and on the final day of Ekasa, for example, they alternate taking over the performance space with the other group, as they are said to alternate actual days of dancing. Eben's standards differ stylistically from those carried by Ogbelaka and Egwadase. Those of Ogbelaka and Egwadase resemble each other. They're the ones you see on the left, with robust figures wearing flared cloaks in a variety of fabrics. Eben dancers carry standards featuring 3 cylindrical figures, the central figure wearing 2 feathers or crown ornaments, represented by slender strips of foil. Eben's fabrics are restricted to red, green, and white. That considerable rivalry existed between the two dancing factions, Ogbelaka, Egwadase versus Eben, is evidenced in a singing duel between the two that occurred during Ekenzua II's coronation in 1933, in which each satirized the capabilities of the other. Ogbelaka hurled the insult, "Go and come, go and come." It is the only song that Eben people sing. Go and come, go and come. Eben retorted with, "Ogbelaka does not reach a man. It is in the belly they have built their words. Ogbelaka does not reach a man. It is in the belly they have built their words." The late Joseph Nevedomsky, in a personal communication, explained this song to me, saying that Ogbelaka accused Eben of only knowing the entry and exit songs. That is, they didn't perform very often. While Eben replied that Ogbelaka men are short in stature, meaning not tall enough to be men, referring to the qualifying height requirements for the army or police. The reason they are not tall is that they talk too much, and the words are too heavy for their heads to hold. So they fall into their bellies. That is to say, their brains are in their bellies rather than in their heads. The standards display stuffed cloth figures representing the Oba and the chiefs, and Queenie Dia, and such symbolic animals as elephants, leopards, and birds relating to Benin history. The 3 figures on the left suggest the Oba, flanked by twin supporters called Enabore, a role most often played by the chiefs / priests Osu and Osuan, an image recurring in Benin Palace life as well as in Benin art since the 1500s. And you see an example of an ivory carved version of this in the lower left. The image on the right is identified as Queenie Dia, the most famous image of her being the 16th century ivory pendant masks worn by the Oba. The drawing on the screen represents the Queen Idia ivory mask in a German museum, though the coral bead decorations may or may not still appear on the actual object. The standard on the left, on the current slide, features an elephant, a royal metaphor of power. In this case, the object rendered as a drawing shows an 18th century Oba standing on an elephant, a stance of victory over a rebellious faction that contested his ascension to the throne. Above the elephant are celestial symbols, sun, crescent moon, and jagged forms, suggestive of lightning. Below are two reflective circles, suggesting pools of water, a reference to the spirit world. Single figures, such as the bird on the right, mounted on poles, are generally carried by participating children, because these are easier for them to manage. The bird represents the so-called bird of prophecy, who foretold Esigie's defeat before the Igala Wars and earned his own death. Esigie emerged victorious from this war, and commemorating this are the events of Ugie Oro ritual, where chiefs dance beating bronze replicas of the bird, which you see in the lower right, for his faithlessness. Ugie Oro also serves to reinforce the king's power over the chiefs in perpetuity, reminding them that they, like the bird, had failed to support him fully at this time. The front and back planes of the shadow box and the sides may carry cut metal images of Benin royal swords, the Ada and the Eben, or symbolic animals, as well as mirrors that catch and reflect the light. Red and white are the colors of the Benin Kingdom. White symbolizes ritual purity, good luck, health, long life, prosperity, and happiness. Red symbolizes heat and danger, power, strength, and authority. Green is interpreted by the head of the Ogbelaka Guild as simply a flashy color to create visual excitement. Of course, it is also one of the colors of the Nigerian flag. Some of the Ogbelaka and Egwadasa figures feature printed cloth in various colors, presumably for the same reason. However, Felix Osagbovo, a colleague at the University of Benin, in a discussion of Edo color symbolism, suggests that green signifies vegetation, regeneration, nature, and fruitfulness, an important message of hope, a prayer for the reign of the new Oba. The mirrors symbolize rivers and the seas of Eriuing, the other world, and their flash is suggestive of the transition between this world and the next. Rehearsals are also begun, carried out daily for 2 to 3 hours to teach and perfect the dance for the forthcoming event. This is necessary because of the infrequent occurrence of the dance. In the 20th century, it was performed only in the years 1933, 1936, 1979, 1998, and 2016. And many members of the performing circle may not have witnessed the dance or performed with the group before. This is Ogbelaka's lead dancer, who has participated in 3 Ekasa performances, 1979, 1998, and 2016. And he will be participating in the performance when the current Oba posthumously installs his mother as a queen mother. This was most likely to have occurred, it should have occurred, in 2019, 3 years after the Oba's coronation, but it has not been announced as yet. Instruments for the dance are long drums and gongs, played by men who stay in the center of the dance circle and who take charge of the dance by providing the underlying beat, which is the rhythm of the dance and the calculated pace at which the movement is made. Women, wives and daughters of the 3 guilds, give rhythmic support, playing gourd rattles and singing along with the men, though their presence is not ritually required. The dancers are exclusively male, ranging in age from young children to elders, a diversity that helps bring continuity to the practice given the infrequent nature of the performances. The dancers must all be sons of men from the 3 quarters who cooperate in the performance, or who have been adopted into the quarter, in which case a man severs his birth relationships. The late Peter Omokaro, often referred to as the Oyibo, or European, who danced Ekasa, and you see him here in the center of the slide, was something of a mystery to outsiders who did not realize that Peter was a true son of the soil from Eguadase, who happened to resemble his Italian mother more than his Nigerian father. When questioned prior to his death, this man, who was probably always treated as something of an outsider because of his skin color, as he grew up in Nigeria, was insistent that dancing Ekasa for him was important because it showed clearly that he was a true indigen. To kick off Ekasa, the individual guilds process from their neighborhoods to the old palace at Usama, carrying the standards wrapped in brown paper. Eguadase and Ogbelaka converge at a convenient point and continue together. At Usama, the guild members will dance with the standards covered until the Obanwayi of Ogbelaka brings one to the crown prince, whom you see here, who will unwrap it, thus being the first to publicly view the work and declaring Ekasa officially open. All the members present then unveil their standards and continue dancing for some hours. As you see here. Now, according to Dr. Josephine Abbey, the Ekasa dance itself is an extended sequence dance. That is, the dancers follow a set pattern of movements. Dancers may sometimes reduce the speed of the dance to gather energy, but the lead dancer always spurs them to action by calling out, "Bend down," for dancers to put in more effort. Now, throughout the processions and the dancing in the three venues, the old palace at Usama, the current palace at Arasogbo, and the Azomos compound, songs of praise and warning are sung. The most significant of the processional songs is the one you see on the screen. We are going to the center of Benin, meaning the palace. We are going to break open the pot of words. Implied here is the standard bearer's spiritual sanction to speak through song. The standards locate the dancers in the spirit world, as a mask does, conferring on them the voice of the spirits and giving them authority to put people on notice. This is a song regularly repeated throughout the Ekasa period. Ekasa warns even the chiefs. As the Obanwayi told me, we can warn the chiefs. We can't say anything to them, but we can sing it in song. So to warn the chiefs about appropriate behavior, they sing, "The palace is not a marketplace. Be mindful." In 1979, during the Ekasa performance associated with the coronation of Erediawa, this song took on a specific topical meaning with the words, "Help me tell the elders that the Iyase title is not attained by balloting." The Iyase is the Benin Kingdom's prime minister. There was turmoil among the chiefs and political wrangling over this position that had fallen vacant, even though it is in the Oba's prerogative to appoint his second in command. In 2016, another song, "There is Only One King in Benin," referred to the attack on the legitimacy of the crown prince by members of the Ogiamwan family prior to the coronation. This is a long story, and time doesn't permit me to go into it. Even the Oba can be reproached in song by the Ekasa groups. If the Oba doesn't appear on time during their performance, he's supposed to come out and watch. They can call him to come out, comparing him unfavorably to Oba Esigie, who was always there. or in the case of one of the guilds, unhappy about coming out to perform a posthumous burial ceremony for Oba Akenzua's mother in 1936, sang, "We are not slaves to the Queen Mother," though they had to obey the Oba's direct command and perform. Songs of warning are interspersed with songs of praise. Iyare, Iyare, a warrior's welcome home. The Ekpen, literally leopard, shall go and come back safely. Destiny, destiny, it is one's, meaning the Oba's, destiny that leads him to greatness. Our King Eware, we rejoice with you. And from the crowd as well as the performers, Oba Gatokpere, long live the king. In sum, Ekasa is a ritual performance involving art, dance, music, and the participation of the crown prince / Oba, the Izomo, the war chief, and members from 3 guilds associated with 2 of the palace societies, Iwebo and Iwegwe. These guilds or particular sub-guilds have distinctive responsibilities in dance, drumming, music, and burial. Distinctions, even rivalry, between the guilds are manifest in the styles of the standards they carry, to some extent in their costuming, the songs they sing, and their respective levels of responsibility. For Ekasa, in relation to the coronation versus the funeral obsequies for an Ioba or Queen Mother, the only occasions on which the ritual dance is performed. The dance is linked historically with the reign of Esigie and his mother, Idia. That Ekasa is performed for both King and Queen Mother relates to the precedents set, or at least recorded and remembered as such, during Esigie and Idia's time. Ekasa thus serves as a perpetual reminder of this important king and his mother, linked to the expansion of the Benin Empire and the establishment of its basic structure, a reminder brought to bear on each new Oba. At the same time, Ekasa is a performed prayer meant to protect the crown prince / Oba during a period of transition, while he is on the threshold between the natural world and the supernatural world, a time of great vulnerability. Or, as my colleague Josephine Eweka Abbey has put it, taking a royal Edo viewpoint, it is a historical reenactment of an ancestral deification that calls for absolute submission of the citizenry to constituted authority. Ekasa advises people on the correct ethical behavior that will bring about growth and development in Benin. The ritual dance emphasizes leadership, community, allegiance, and submission. It is a significant coronation rite of divination through which the gods admonish the people to live right, do right, and serve the Oba for the good of the community. Oba Gatokpere, long live the king. And here you see the Oba closing the ceremony by having taken a standard from one of the dancers. That dancer will in the future be the protege of the Oba and will have his education paid for, will have opportunities provided for him throughout his life. And as I said, Oba Gatokpere, long live the king. Now let me acknowledge my principal colleagues. Daughters of the Oba, Dr. Peju Layuwola, who you see in the upper left, who is Oba Akenzua's granddaughter, and Dr. Josephine Eweka Abbey, whom you see in the lower left, who is descended from Eweka II, who preceded Akenzua as Oba. Dr. Layuwola is an artist and art historian. She introduced me to Peter Omakaro, whom you see standing in the center of the slide. Dr. Abbey is a dance specialist who teaches at the University of Benin. In the center is Peter Omakaro. He introduced me to many performers, and his presence, or my being with him at many performances, legitimized my presence there. Peter was killed in a carjacking outside his house in Benin, several days after Ekasa had closed. On the far right, you see the Izomo, the war chief, who is in white, and you see the Obanwayi, the head of Ogbelaka Guild, who has the red shirt on. I interviewed both of them several times. They, as did Peter, speak excellent English. The backstory. I had carried out considerable research prior to meeting up with Dr. Abbey at the palace one day towards the end of the performance period. Given her experience researching ritual performance in Benin, particularly in association with the palace, and her language skills, she is a native speaker of the Edo language, and her position as a member of the royal family, it seemed that we could usefully collaborate, since our interests overlapped, but were quite different. She is a dance historian, and I am an art historian. So Dr. Abbey and I pursued interviewing members of the three guilds, approaching the head of Eben Guild, whom you see on the left, with the memorial portrait of his late father, with whom I had not had contact. I was well acquainted with the Obanwayi, whom you see seated on the right with me and with Josephine and with his head dancer. The Obanwayi, it turns out, is a naturalized American citizen who lives in Brooklyn. He returned to Benin to carry out inherited responsibilities now that his own father, who officiated at the previous two Ekasa performances, was late. An earlier version of this paper was given at the University of East Anglia, and Dr. Abbey and I published jointly a paper in Umuayan, the Journal of Edo and Benin Studies, in which she, as the lead author, focused on performance. Now, as I began working with this material again for this talk, and for the previous one at the University of East Anglia, I had one of those 3 o'clock in the morning brainwaves. The late Joseph Nevedomsky had published a black and white image of Ekasa standards in his third article on Oba Arediawa's 1979 Coronation. And you see examples here of images that he published. He had donated his archive of more than 10,000 images to the Smithsonian. Eureka! There should be other images of the 1979 Ekasa performance in the archive. So I contacted the archivist at the National Museum of African Arts, Elliott Elisoffen Archive, and she sent me 120 thumbnails. I had a follow-up, and here you see one of the colored thumbnails that she sent, and I'm allowed to use it with the proviso that I inform you that these slides are currently being cataloged and digitized. They are not really ready to be put up online yet, but they will be accessible by 2022 in terms of her estimation of what's happening in terms of the time frame that they will be working on these. I had a follow-up brainwave about a Benin-based photographer, Tamfio Fiore, who was also working in 1979 and who relatively recently had published his own book on the Coronation. And you see one of his photographs here from that book. I have contacted him and he has agreed to send me digital versions of the prints he published. Now, what is the point of having access to this material and what do I hope to do with it? First, there is the issue of changing style and the simplification that seems to have occurred between 1979 and 2016. Second is to try and follow up the source of this imagery in Benin. Clearly, the other quasi-narrative form that is rectilinear are the Benin plaques. Both the plaques and the framed standards are linked by tradition to the reign of Oba Esigie in the 16th century. Of course, at this point, we have no way of knowing whether they were concurrent with the plaques or a later development. Clearly, there is a relationship, and I will note that Tam Fiore waxes quite eloquent about a presumed relationship in his book, but I have to warn you that it's a presumed relationship in this case. Joe Nevedomsky has suggested that they may relate to the okun, or boxes decorated with cut metal images and mirrors. And you see them here on the left, used in the burial ceremonies of Benin Kingdom men. These boxes represent the wealth of the deceased, and they lead a parade of mourners through the streets prior to the burial. Again, there certainly seems to be an analogy here, but we don't know about direct relationships at this point. Relationships between these artifacts, especially those that are ephemeral, can be addressed in changing styles between 1979 and 2016 only. We don't have visual images for earlier Ekasa performances. The earlier ones, that is to say those from 1979, being more complex than the more recent ones, those from 2016. But many of the questions are open-ended, or the responses to the questions will be once I have framed them. But I think it behooves me to go back through the literature on Benin burial ritual, both for kings and citizens alike, consult with various art historians whose work has focused on Benin, as well as with Nigerian historians. Above all, I will continue working with Edo colleagues from the University of Benin, who covered the 2016 coronation, and who may be able to bring additional insights into the material or ask some additional questions. There may also be an Ekasa coming up for the late mother of the current Oba. I am not a Benin Kingdom expert. I have to assure you of this. My primary research in Nigeria was in Edo North, the areas north of Benin, where traditions do not clearly relate to royal traditions, even though the communities claim in their Orthodox histories to derive from Benin. That, like so many other things I've had to bring up in this talk, is another story. So let me just end with a reference to two exhibitions at the Fitchburg Art Museum. Cloth is Money, Textiles from the Sahel, consists of textiles collected by BU's John Hutchison and two iPads with a continuously looping PowerPoint called 3 Empires at a Glance, one with the text in English and the other in Spanish. What I like best about this exhibition is that I have been able to take modern objects and show their relationship to West African history from the 11th to the 16th centuries. It's a small exhibit, but since most of you have not been to the Fitchburg Art Museum, you can also enjoy moving objects. African and Oceanic art from the Fitchburg Art Museum. Both exhibits will be on view until June. We are closed to the public at this point in time, but we hope to open in early February. It depends on how the pandemic moves. but when we are open Wednesday through Friday from 12 to 4, Saturdays and Sundays from 11 to 5. On the first Thursday of the month, historically, we have been open till later in the evening, but you need to check the website for details, www.fitchburgartmuseum.org. Thanks very much. Okay, well, thank you very much, all of you, for listening. I'm looking forward to having some interesting comments and questions. And so let me turn this over to Eric, who is monitoring that piece.
Thanks so much, Jean. And maybe if you want, I don't want to have you take away this these beautiful images, but it might be nice to, if you
Sure.
stop.
Do you want me to go? Should we go regular screen share?
Yeah, I think if you end the screen share, then we can actually see.
So so I stop share, so we go, yeah.
That way we can see your face when you're responding to the questions and stuff.
I'm wearing my coronation cloth, as I may have pointed out, and this is Prince Ehenadin, because he was a crown prince when I bought this cloth, because it was just before the coronation. And I mentioned to Eric earlier that, of course, I wore it at the coronation. I was fortunate to be there and had an invitation to go to one of the two venues that was available. I got to watch it on big screen TV, but I didn't go in where the real mucky mucks went in, where the Oba of not only the Oba but the various emirs who came down to be part of the audience, and the Oni of Ife arrived with his retinue and so on. They were in one of the buildings, and then the other was actually the museum yard, which is just across the road from where the other venue. And so I had a very good seat, so I could see everything perfectly. It was wonderful. But of course, I wore this cloth. And anytime I was doing research, when I went to see the head of the Eben Guild, because it was a kind of sensitive area, he hadn't been terribly enthusiastic about meeting with us. I wore my coronation cloth. And of course, Josephine used her middle name, which is Eweka, because she is a member of the Eweka line of Obas. So that gave us credentials of a certain kind. So he was actually he was a bit more hospitable. He was just very nervous because he was young in the sense and had not done this very often and didn't know quite how to answer questions, what he should answer and what he shouldn't answer. So when I also produced a great number of printed photographs that I had taken of his people when they did perform, when I was photographing, and gave them to him, and that also helped, him be a little bit more willing to answer questions.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I know I had the opportunity to be at the coronation for the Sultan of Agadez in Niger in 2016, and it was quite amazing to see all the emirs coming from all over Niger as well as Nigeria, just seeing how far afield the connections span. So we've had a few questions come in during the talk, and then also I see a hand up among the participants as well. So I'm going to go sort of chronologically in the order that they've been coming in. But for participants who are here, who joined us later, if you do have a question you want to pose to Jean, feel free to either submit it in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, or you can click to raise your hand, and we can have you. I can unmute you when I call on you, and you can ask your question verbally. But the first question was from earlier in the talk from one of our other visiting researchers, Noel Twagira Mungu, He was asking about if the white color had a special meaning here. I know so it's interesting to see how the costume combines tradition and modernity. I forget exactly which slide this was on. I don't know, Noelle, if you'd like to maybe add on that. I can unmute you right now.
Oh, hi. No, thank you. That's actually, thank you for this excellent presentation. The presenter gave the answer just after I raised the question, talking about what really the white color means. But what I'm really interested in here is really this combination of tradition and modernity in terms of costume. Whether that's, I don't know whether the speaker has a comment on that.
Well, I'm not quite sure what is modern about their costumes. They're wearing wrapper for the most part, which Benin men have worn for, as far as I know, historically, they wore wrapper. And certainly they've worn it for a long time. And they were not wearing the modern Benin costume, which has embroidery, which replicates the scarification patterns, which Benin chiefs would have on their torsos. But most people don't have those scarification patterns anymore, so they've been kind of reenacted through embroidery on shirts. But the white wrapper is very much what people wore. Now they do wear shoes. They wear a lot running shoes, a lot things that are comfortable because it's an arduous program. I mean, they're marching for a couple of miles, or maybe not quite that much, to get from their neighborhood to the palace. They don't come in a car or vans. They have to walk through the city. And then they can spend anywhere from, if they get there because they get there at 12 noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which is the height of heat in the day. And they dance until 4:30 in the afternoon, taking occasional breaks. But they're out there dancing in that circle constantly. So that, because it is a charm, it is a prayer, it is meant to invoke the spiritual presence to protect the Oba, who is also supposed to be there, although he gets to sit in the shade. I will say that much. So I'm not quite sure what you think of as being modern about this, or just the fact that it's still being done.
No, thank you. That was about just the clothes. Just we see some clothes now are made from outside and those homemade. But just talking about color, I would like to add something interesting I learned from your presentation. Is just that the opposite of white is not black; it's red.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No.
Thank you, Noelle. So we had a couple of questions from Tim Weisskoll, who's another one of our visiting researchers, about the color red. So this is continuing the same conversation. I think you did answer some of these questions, but I'm going to go ahead and just read them so you can address them as you wish. But what is the association between the color red and the coral bead adornment? What is the importance of coral in the ceremonies and more generally in Benin art and ceremony? There's a question about the origin and whether or not there's an archaeological record prior to Portuguese contact of the coral, and also if it was more abundantly available after contact from Portuguese who maybe brought it from the islands in the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. And finally, why is it associated with the Ogbilaka Guild?
Well, it's associated with both Ogbilaka and Eben. I mean, it's associated with chiefs, generally speaking. And royalty and chiefs and people of substance today in Benin City who may not be royal, although almost who's anybody in Benin City is linked to the royal family somewhere along the line, simply because the Oba had so many wives historically, and all of those people have had, had children, and their children had children, and so there's a very large network of people who have some relationship to the royal family, not necessarily as close as, say, Dr. Layiwola, who is here, by the way. She raised her hand or just had something in the chat. Who is a granddaughter, who is a real daughter of the Oba in that sense. She's a granddaughter of a fairly recent Oba. But so it's a sign of, it's a status symbol on the one hand, but it's also linked to Olokun, who is the god of the sea. And there's a reference there to the Oba's dominion over not just the land, but also of the sea. I can't really answer the question about when people have been started wearing coral, although it's certainly referenced visually, not as coral, but as sculptural form on the 16th century plaques. You see beads, being worn. Now, whether they were coral beads or whether they were stone beads, or it's different, beads made of other materials that were more easily available locally, I'm not sure. I don't know. Dr. Layiwola, can you answer that? See if she's still there. You have to be unmuted. And do I have to unmute you?
I've offered to unmute her. We'll see if she's able to respond.
No.
Nothing yet.
They were trade goods, basically, from the Portuguese, presumably, initially. As Tim suggested, was one of the options he provided me with in terms of answering.
So the next we had a couple questions from Kathy Kernan.
She's in a noisy place, so that's why she's not talking to us.
Okay, no problem. But I see that we had a couple questions from Kathy, and I see actually her hand is up. So I'm going to unmute her and ask her if she would like to.
Oh, now Kathy's going to ask me the hard one, really hard.
Well, I had a couple things to tell you as well. I've got some pictures from before Oba Rediawa's coronation of Ekasa. So I'll share those with you. And I've got pictures from the Ioba's Ekasa in '98 that I'll share with you later.
Well, you were one of the people I was planning on contacting.
Well, I'm ahead of you there. I had two questions, really. One that I raised my hand for and one that I had in the chat. There was an image. It was the slide that had the current chief Obamwanyi, whose father I remember with great fondness. And I remember when he was wrestling and hoped to be in the Olympics. But in that picture, it had some of the Ekasa dancers behind, and one of them had a triangular standard. And I wondered if there was anything particularly significant about that, because it's certainly not the most common type. So I wondered what you had to say about that. And my second question was just if you could elaborate at all on the Azomo's involvement with Ekasa, because, I'm working on a book on Oba Sigye, and so the presence of one of the Uzama as a prominent figure in this ceremony is a little surprising insofar as Sigye and the Uzama did not get along. So I didn't know whether the Azomo's involvement might have happened later in the festival's development or not.
Well, theoretically, according to several different versions of the story, which I collected from the Obamwanyi, from the Azomo, from the Ishikure, then Ishikure. Basically, Idia got his help, or he helped Queen Idia capture the performers of Ekasa, who were seen either within the tree as witches or in the forest, as animals, to bring them into and to bring the dance to the Benin Kingdom. But I'll be happy to share the interviews, which I recorded and transcribed with you as well. No,
Thank you.
That's what it's all about.
That's true.
Um,
What about
I'm
that?
looking forward to your book on Asigie.
Well, I'm working hard. What about the triangular standard?
I don't know. That's a question. I mean, by the time I finished last night, because I had worked all day Saturday with some of this new material, and my PowerPoint didn't save. So,
yeah.
So I spent yesterday redoing it, but I put a Zoom call into the Obanwayi in Brooklyn because we had talked on the phone just after I got access to these images, because I want to share them with him and see if he can identify people and what else I can ask him. And that's one of the questions I can ask. I'm not sure that there is any particular significance. It does, however, make them look a little bit more like the Okun boxes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's I don't know if, and they're not common. No, maybe it's just a more difficult shape to construct in terms of the frame, because it's a triangle rather than just a regular angle, rather than a right angle in terms of the jointure.
Thanks, Jean. And I did wonder one other thing, and that was whether the birds, whether that single standard with the bird, whether all three guilds had that.
I'd have to look at the Eben things, but certainly the Ogbelaka and Egwadasa both had. There were a lot of birds. Okay. I think they did have them. I have to look at Joe's images from the first performance, the initial performance in '79, because and also Dr. Laiwola's photographs from that initial performance, because she photographed a bunch of kids, and I think they were with the Eben people, but I have to look and see what the adults were carrying in terms of the figure style. I just got Joe's, and so this has been, it's very exciting. I mean, they're not cleaned and so on. I did screenshots so that I could make sure I could have them when they disappear from my Dropbox. But if there's anything that you need to use, or I'm sure, I have no doubt that the archivist will send things to you as well if you need them.
I went through the whole archives already.
Clean and color correction, so on individual slides.
Right.
If we want to use something for publication.
Yes.
Because obviously we don't want something published that is inferior quality. So, but Kathy, how nice that you were able to sign in.
I was so glad that you sent me the invitation. Thank you.
Now, Kathy is a Benin expert. Benin Kingdom expert, I should say.
And I'll just answer then one of the questions previously about the coral. It wasn't from East India. It was Mediterranean coral that the Portuguese brought.
Right. Okay.
Great. So the next question comes from Sarah Berry. She's asking about how much influence do Benin royals have in contemporary economic and political affairs? Do performances such as Ekasa contribute to their influence? This sort of parallel, the question I've been wondering too is just sort of what's going on in terms of the really current sort of end SARS movement, if you're seeing anything relating to your research and that going on as well.
Well, certainly the songs raised topical issues where there was a kind of problems associated with the palace and the chiefs, between the palace and the chiefs. In terms of the Obas, are we talking about Benin Kingdom politics, or are we talking about Nigerian politics? I guess that's the question I would have. Ekasa has very little to do with Nigerian politics. It has a lot to do with, in a sense, with Benin Kingdom political issues, if they're putting the chiefs on notice, particularly with the problems with the Ogiamwem family, who were contesting the crown prince's right to become Oba in 2000, late 2015, early 2016, because the coronation had to be postponed. And actually, Kathy Kurnow did a paper on that, which she published in Umuayan, the Journal of Edo, Benin and Edo Studies, which is an open source journal, by the way, out of SUNY Oswego. So if you Google, Journal of Edoid Studies, it will come up and you can access the articles online. And there are a couple. Kathy has two very, very strong articles in two different issues.
Great. So I have a couple more questions here from Tim Weiswell. So one thing he's asking is, what is meant by the celebration of the third-year coronation? He's asking here. He's posted a link in the third-year coronation anniversary of the Oba of Benin.
The third year coronation? Oh, third year after. Well, I don't know what I think there's probably some sense, and I know this is true from Edo North. 3 years is often a time distance between certain kinds of cycles, like having children and so on. And when you have a posthumous installation of a mother as a queen mother, that means she died before you became Oba. So she wasn't a queen mother in her lifetime. But Oba Ekenzua did install his mother 3 years, but he had to wait. He waited 3 years, and but he also had a very peculiar situation in that his grandmother died very soon, and his mother died, and he became Oba because his grandfather died, or his father died. So that he had several things that he had to do simultaneously, and he couldn't do them simultaneously. He really had to wait. And the song that I am quoting was told to me by a local Benin historian named Dr. Isian, who got it from his father, who was who lived in Nkenzua's time and was there during the 39 coronation, that Eben did not want to do this. They said it shouldn't be done posthumously. And he was absolutely insistent. And that's why they sang this song, that they weren't slaves to the Queen Mother. But they didn't have any choice. If the Oba commanded them, they had to do it. And so this is the situation that's occurring. The one in the 1990s, that woman was a queen mother in her lifetime. Her son had become Oba during her lifetime. So she became a queen, and so she was automatically considered to be, it was appropriate. But they waited 3 years after I think, close to 3 years, didn't they, Kathy? If she's still here. Before that was held. There are about 3 years difference.
Well, I'm not sure that it was really 3 years that time, but the 3-year thing also for both chiefs and the Oba, once they get installed, they have ingested a lot of medicines to make them more invincible, but people test them supernaturally. And the idea is if you can survive that 3 years of testing, you're solid in your title or solid on the throne. However, they have coronation anniversaries these days almost every year. It's just a celebration like a birthday.
Right. It doesn't involve Ekasa.
Right.
At least not yet.
No, not normally.
Who knows what? But so we're waiting to find out whether Eben will object again, or whether they've learned their lesson in 1933 or 36, 39, whenever it was. but it has, we have to wait and see. That's the question that I was raising with the Obanwayi, and he was very discreet in his answer. So I'm hoping when we start looking at pictures, he will open up a little bit more, because he was very open with me, and as open as he could be, given his situation, given the fact that there were things he wasn't supposed to tell me or couldn't tell me, couldn't show me, and so forth and so on. But he was, I used to go and spend time at in his compound occasionally, because he wanted to talk American politics. He was homesick for the other part of his life. So, and he was very helpful in terms of giving me the history as he understood it, and as he remembered it from his grandfather telling him and his father, and in terms of kind of describing the songs and singing some of them for me, and then translating them into English for me. So it's, I'm hoping to be able to continue field work, if you will, work with him and talking to him as this paper moves forward, and getting my colleagues in Benin to ask a few questions and help me deal with answers. And then, as I said, once my draft is finished, I will send it off to Josephine Abbey and let her see what she has to say about it, because she's done a certain amount of research on ritual performances associated, with the palace. And while, again, she doesn't have the same access as some of the sons of the Oba, so to speak, do, because of gender issues. Women often aren't allowed in certain places in the palace, and so on. I mean, when I was working with the Ekasa groups, I would go, and I would be there for 4 to 5 hours too. And I'd photograph the men when they were dancing, and they would go off, and the Oba had to provide them with snacks. And so they'd go off into the shade somewhere, kind of far away, to an area which was restricted. And the women had to stay out either in the sun, or at some point there was a tent there, and so it wasn't so bad. And so I would go and hang out with the women, and which was also very interesting. And I took their photographs too, and did portraits and so on. And so that actually one day the guards didn't want to let me in. I was following the group as they were processing in, and they said, "You can't come in." I said, "What do you mean I can't come in?" And the women just turned around and looked at the guard and said, "She is with us." So it's always good to have friends. It's always good to have friends.
Well, I think on that note, Jean, we want to thank you for being one of our friends, long-term friends of the African Studies Center. It's great to finally have you here to share your work with us. We do have to sort of wrap up here, but I think we can all say, thank you, and I think we're looking forward to seeing this in print, when you send it along. So thank you, and have a great week.
Thank you.